Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today we are doing a listener suggestion from Jude, and we'll be reading Jude's message in a second about marriage and disability, because it is Disability Pride Month, and this is something I think a lot of people don't know about. You can see our recent episode on women and disability, past episodes on the ADA, the past episode we did with invisible disability with Eves. We've done a lot of stuff around this, but those are a few that came to my mind. Also, a note about terminology. I know I said this recently. There's not agreement currently on the quote correct way to say people with disabilities or disabled people. So just a note about that. A lot of people use them interchangeably. Some people have really strong opinions and they have great reasoning behind those opinions. We're probably going to use them based on what the articles we use, and also the people are using in context of what we're talking about. So just a note. Also a note. We are not legal experts. No. We have never interacted with these services, and they're kind of complicated, and I would argue purposely so, which we're going to talk about. But note about that. And just a reminder, the disabled community is the largest marginalized community in the world, and a majority of us will experience a temporary disability at one point. All right. So just to reiterate from our recent Monday Mini on women and disability, from the CDC, quote, about 36 million women in the U.S. have disabilities, and the number is growing. About 44% of those aged 65 years or older are living with a disability. The most common cause of disability for women is arthritis or rheumatism. And from now, women with disabilities are particularly disadvantaged when it comes to wage equality. In 2022, women who are disabled made 72 cents for every dollar paid to a man who is disabled. Compared to the non-disabled community, women with disabilities made 68 cents to every dollar earned by able-bodied men. If an individual from this community is seeking employment, the current hiring rate of women with disabilities between the ages of 16 to 64 stands at 37%. Throughout the employment process, women can face challenges ranging from organizational readiness and inclusivity to accessible employment processes and workplace inclusivity provisions. And of course, people of color and Black people specifically are disproportionately impacted by all of this as well. Okay, so let us get on to this listener mail. So Jude wrote, I apologize if this has been covered in the past. Part of my disability is memory problems from ECT medical treatment. And I apologize for not thinking of this before the month started, because I imagine you record a good chunk of episodes significantly in advance. But I hate the fact marriage equality does not exist for disabled people, I mean. While SSI is not ideal, if you amass more than $2,000 in your bank account, they'll cut you off. There's a loophole called ABLE accounts, but I do not know that much about these, though opening one is a goal of mine. It's basically all I got because I can't work a normal job. But part of it is you cannot get married, gay or straight, without the risk of losing benefits. I've also heard of the government breaking couples apart. They understood they couldn't get married with this fact. It's not a happy topic, and I apologize for that, but I think it's a topic more people need to know about. I am on the asexual spectrum, but I'm not completely aromantic or anything. I would love to date someone someday, but I don't look forward to starting a conversation with, since I'm disabled, I legally can never marry you. If you're looking for that sort of thing, go elsewhere. So because of that, I've never tried dating. A few people have dated me in the sense of my oblivious ass not knowing it was a date until they said something. There's more I could say, like that my government health insurance doesn't cover gender-affirming care, so while I am pursuing top surgery, I'm going to have to find another way to pay for it. If you know of a way for me to become a best-selling author, you know where to find me. LOL. If I did, I would reach out immediately.
And hopefully we would be with you.
Hopefully we would be with you indeed. Please buy our book, available wherever you get your books.
Shameless plug. Thanks, dude. Oh, that's so sad. I did not realize that was. I've heard many people talk about not getting married for several reasons. Like this does hurt my benefits for this, the dual income thing. But wow, this is a whole different level.
Yes, I had only heard kind of anecdotally about it. I'd never researched into it. And so thank you very much, Jude, for sending this to us. Because, like I said, I think a lot of people don't know about it. It's very important to talk about. And Jude also sent resources, which we are going to be referencing throughout this. And like I said, it is a bit of a complicated discussion because it involves a few laws and regulations. So we're going to break down some of the important ones first, all revolving around government benefits, largely federal government benefits, Social Security or otherwise, that disabled people in the U.S. can use based on their ability or not to work. Oh, and just for fun, the rules aren't consistent. So that's fun. Yeah. But onwards.
So this is one of the articles that Jude sent from the Disability Secrets by Bethany K. Lawrence. So one is Supplementary Security Income, SSI, for people with disabilities who have very low incomes and those who don't qualify for SSDI. And in 2024, the SSI income limit for one person is $943 per month. And for couples, it is $1,415 a month. That is not a lot. Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, for eligible workers who can't work because of disability. Disabled Adult Child Benefits, which are based on your parents' earnings record, and Surviving Spouse Benefits, which are based on the record of your deceased spouse or ex-spouse.
Right. So those are some key terms we're going to be using throughout this. But when it comes to this question of marriage and how marriage impacts these benefits or doesn't, which is what we're specifically looking into, we're going to go kind of piece by piece. So let's start with SSI, Supplemental Security Income, which is the most important in terms of this conversation. This was established about 50 years ago. Getting married doesn't impact eligibility for SSI, but the spouse's income does. So if the spouse in question has an income and you live with them, then that does impact those receiving SSI because the Social Security Administration, or the SSA, will pin some of the spouse's income to the person getting it.
Right. And I'm pretty sure we'll probably talk about this, but this is also the conversation of like domestic violence being higher and abuse being higher within the disabled communities because of rules like this.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
This practice is called deeming spousal income. Basically, they, quote, deem that a portion of a legally married spouse's income to the disabled person in question. They can essentially lower the SSI or make them ineligible entirely. And a reminder, we pay taxes.
Yeah. That
go into this. That has been used for military use, but not for people in our community. Again, reminder.
It's also not limited to legal marriage either. It impacts those, quote, holding themselves out to be married. This very much confused me, but it essentially means you're presenting yourselves as married and or are essentially married as we would traditionally judge it. Quote, if there's any evidence that either of you present yourselves to others as married, Social Security will probe further, asking questions such as, how do you introduce the other person in social situations? How is mail addressed to you and the other person? Do you still use your married name, if applicable? Do you own your home jointly? If you rent, are both your names on the lease? Do your bills, bank accounts, and tax returns identify you as married? So the SSA could judge you're pretty much married. I'm guessing that they think you're trying to evade the rules by being married in all but documentation and lower or remove the benefits of SSI. We found it was a really dry report from 2003 from the SSA about this, and it seemed to hilariously be like, yep, it's better if you don't get married, but are living together. But you can't hold out for marriage. They're like saying the quiet part out loud.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people who have that conversation in general about legalities in marriage in general. And for those who do want to get married, that's so absurd. But for those who don't want to get married, they're like, yeah, I'm good with it. I'm one of those people. um, from Disability Secrets. If you're living with someone but not married to that person and were never married, Social Security might count your roommate's income as if you were married. This could lower your SSI benefit or even make you ineligible for benefits. But if you're living with a sibling, a caregiver, or a platonic roommate, the SSA wouldn't consider the other person's income. If someone is getting free room and board from a person they're living with, this can cut their SSI by 1/3.
Yep. If both of the people in question receive SSI, their payments are combined and lowered to the couple's rate, which is lower than twice the singles rate. So in other words, two single people together are getting more. But if you become a couple and you get the couple's rate, you're getting less.
Which is absurd.
Yeah, and it has been called the marriage penalty. So this amounts to going from $943 a month, which, as you said, Samantha, is very, very low for a single person, to about $707 a person a month for a married couple if both are receiving SSI. This also impacts countable resources outside of a car, house, and household goods. This is reportedly because the SSA believes it's cheaper and easier living with another person. But it's basically saying if you marry someone who is making $40,000 a year, which is about the federal minimum wage-ish, they make enough to take care of you completely, which is out of touch and wrong and no. Sorry. I wish.
Right.
And this isn't taking into account so many things like wage stagnation, the gender pay gap, childcare, numerous unpaid and unseen things that go into care, or rent and housing control, the difficulty of getting a disability-friendly job, the difficulty of getting these benefits in the first place, the difficulty of understanding how they work, the paperwork. I'm telling you, when I was researching this, my mind was like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired.
The amount of people I've had to advise in social work to do their disability paperwork twice and to make sure that you appeal, because you will most likely be denied immediately, no matter what. Like my parents, who are very staunchly conservative and all like, I don't want to take care of anybody else. They had to go for disability paperwork. They got denied and they were very upset because they're like, we would never take advantage of, ma'am. Mm-hmm. And then me having to talk to them and be like, you have to appeal. I don't think they did. I think they got discouraged and they didn't. I'm like, no, you have to appeal these paperwork because they are literally stacked against you. Any kind of paperwork when it comes to federal government, which for assistance, for any of that, are probably some of the most complicated paperwork I have ever seen. One of the best things that happened in my college course was us being given a full form and told, do this as an assignment, and then coming back and realizing we had all made mistakes and had to start over again, and that what that process looked like. And this is exactly what they do to try to discourage a person who is in need. So all of these things is such a way to hinder and discourage a person from getting actual assistance, which they've probably already paid into, which is the other part that's like, ugh. Anyway, Also, with all that, children also factor into the equation here. Each child impacts the numbers in terms of when a spouse's income is attributed to the person receiving SSI.
Yes. And speaking of complicated, it's like a chart. How many children you have, how much money you'll get or won't get. Basically, by getting married, a disabled person could receive less or none of the benefits they were receiving before. This can mean a huge difference in quality of life or even the difference between life or death. So it's a really big deal. The SSA requires that those receiving SSI contact them within 10 days of marriage or new living arrangements. Otherwise, they will charge an overpayment, which is usually collected by withholding SSI payments. And if anyone's dealt with stuff like this before, the interest rate, if they choose to charge it, can be outrageous. And I feel like 10 days, you're just so stressed during those times. I can easily see how that would fall through the cracks.
Yeah, people don't even go and get their name changed or get their status changed. Some even don't even go and get their marriage certificate and turned in. I know that it takes a long time. Women changing their last name Oh my gosh, it's a damn process. So this, yeah.
And it feels like you would have to, with the mail being what it is, so you would have to mail it pretty much immediately.
Right.
For it to arrive in time.
Right. And they probably don't give you notice that tell you that you did that because the IRS sure doesn't. So you're like, I don't know if it went in or not. I hope so, unless I'm about to be arrested.
Fingers crossed situation.
Right. They want to take all my money from me. Thanks. So here's a quote from 19th News. Qualifying for SSI is important, even for people with significant disabilities who can work, because eligibility is tied to being able to receive home and community-based services covered by Medicaid in many states. Medicaid is the only health insurance that provides in-home care, and the average cost ranges from $51,000 to $70,000 per year, according to the Government Accountability Office. Even most people making middle-class income in salary jobs cannot afford the level of care out of pocket. And again, as someone who has experienced trying to get care for people and assistance for people, it is incredibly expensive, the amount of cost per hour, and they charge per hour. And it could be as simply and as based on the provider. And by the way, it's the limited amount of people that are providers is so small that it's probably one of the most discouraging things I've ever seen in my life, because the likelihood that these people are qualified for very specific things are low to zero. I've never been more frustrated in my life than trying to get accessible care for those who are desperately in need, who are on Medicaid. And y'all, to get on Medicaid, you have to be in the poverty level, essentially, which is also another problem because you want to live and feed yourself. So there's so many complications to this. And if you get too much assistance, by the way, it can stack against you.
Yes.
So much of this. So just getting that, I can't imagine, because in-home care is probably one of the most expensive ways outside of being in an institution that is actually qualified with true amount of medical professionals who can actually cater to their clientele. So what I mean by that is like having one doctor per 3 patients instead of one doctor per 100 patients type of thing. So it's incredibly difficult. And the amount of people who, the good ones who stop providing services for Medicaid because they've had so many runarounds with the government and not being able to do that for them, for people. As you can tell, I could keep going, but it's one of the most frustrating, disheartening, and honestly, it does feel like it's a bit of eugenics within the government. Yeah. When it comes to stuff like this.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll touch on that more briefly in a second. But this continues to be a big point of conversation, because we have people in government that are saying things like, I don't understand. I can go days without this necessary piece of life. I don't know why we have to provide it. Yeah, exactly.
It's not like I go back to my regular life after the one day I tried to see what this felt like.
Right. Oh, makes me mad. And yeah, like you're saying, those home care hours are huge, and there's so many. It's so important, and in many cases, it's about like human dignity. And the cost of losing that and the cost of providing that. And on top of this, we need to have another conversation about how we pay workers for doing this, because there is a reason there's so much burnout, and it's not compensated or respected like it should be.
No, as in fact, most of the times that the workers are there, they're unqualified. And I don't see that as, and I'm not saying that as a slap to those who are in the field. What I'm talking about is in general, they're so unwilling to pay the people what they're worth, that they're willing to hire people who are not qualified to do it. So maybe have 1 or 2 like 10-hour courses, and then they come in as an assistant without like any conversations. Like I've had friends who would do part-time jobs as college students being parapros. So they assist those with disabilities in schools and try to be like active advocates and all that, but they're not really qualified. They're just sometimes college students who just need extra money, which means they're not giving the care. Not everyone, because there are those who really do care and love their job and love the people they're representing. So I'm not saying that, but the qualifications are so low that almost anyone can do it. So it's kind of like, is this really helping? Are you just
Right.
throwing a Band-Aid over a huge gap of needs? And which is also often why a lot of the kids in the system that have any type of disabilities, learning disabilities, any of that are left behind because, again, no one is really qualified to represent them and advocate for them. And they don't know how. That's that other conversation. It's like the parents don't know how, so the parapros definitely don't know how oftentimes. So I say this with seeing that, and then although imposing all these things on top of that and not allowing for people with disabilities to have the life that they want. It's just such an odd thing. And so having these workers who are not qualified because they don't care enough to teach and or give them the qualifications that they need. And then the ones that are so good at it and the ones who are caring and the ones who do go beyond to learn about it are burned out, like you said. And it's all literal minimum wage because that's the only, the most maybe is like $12 an hour. And this is for the sake of someone else's livelihood. It's like, question mark.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of big question marks in this one. So that is SSI. Let us talk about SSDI, or Social Security Disability Insurance. Okay, so if someone has worked long enough to qualify for SSDI, getting married shouldn't affect their or their spouse's benefit payments. There aren't income limits. There aren't property limits like there are with SSI. Now, if someone gets both SSDI and SSI, that can change the answer. That being said, if a person is collecting SSDI from someone else based on their work, marrying or other things can impact the benefit amount. So here are a couple of common examples of that. An adult child receiving benefits from their parents' SSDI based on their parents' work record will probably lose the SSDI benefits by getting married. Children can lose their parents' SSDI dependence benefits based on a couple of things, including turning 18 or 19, depending, or getting married. Another big example, widowers are eligible for receiving their partner's SSDI if they were eligible. However, if you're younger than 60, are younger than 50, and don't have a disability, and you remarry, those benefits stop, which I think, again, is ridiculous because, yeah, like you said, you've put work and money into this. Like,
right.
Wow, okay, it goes away.
Right.
All right. And just a note here, I know we joke about it on the show. You can hear it in our voices because we laugh when we feel helpless. Our healthcare system in the U.S. is a mess at best. At best. And this isn't to say there aren't amazing people working in it, working to change it. We've heard from some of you. We know some of you. And you're amazing. And you do so much in the face of so much. But in this case, what we're talking about specifically here is some of the routine medications and procedures or visits for people receiving SSI or SSDI are thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars a month. And we know all about private insurance and how they try to get around covering people with pre-existing conditions, legal or not. It's not supposed to be legal, but I feel like they still get away with it. And this includes a spouse's insurance, which seems to be a big part of what underpins this marriage penalty, which we also know if you're depending on your spouse's private insurance, that can look pretty grim as well. So
Right.
it's really, really expensive, ultimately, is what I'm saying. And most of us, I would say almost all of us, couldn't afford it. So Jude also sent us an NPR story from 2022 called Millions of Disabled Americans Could Lose Federal Benefits If They Get Married by Erica Mahoney, that in very NPR fashion has a very specific personal story while also telling a much larger story. In it, Mahoney interviews Congressman Jimmy Panetta of California, who had recently introduced the Marriage Equality for Disabled Adults Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. Other states like Ohio and Louisiana followed suit. I feel like all of them have been stalled, but please let me know if that's not true. And they dive into how these laws and rules were written. It was just assumed people with disabilities wouldn't get married, which is an incredibly ableist idea that we've talked about before, and also holds the kind of infantilizing and desexualizing of people with disabilities within it. but also a long history of violence and control. It's also true the idea used to be that one person, the man, in a very heterosexual sense, was the breadwinner who took care of the wife, who did all the housekeeping. This is no longer the case, and really not possible for a lot of people. Almost everyone I know that's in a couple can only exist based on dual income. It's just really antiquated. And yes, we need to address why single income homes are so unrealistic now, too. And pay people who take care of kids. Having kids is expensive.
Right. I think it's just such a weird fault of like, again, in a world where our country specifically is like, we need to care for the children, but not really. You and you take care of them on your own. You're on your own. Like, it's kind of like this level of disconnect where you think, well, now that you have children and your push is for more children to be born, because that's your thing, apparently, how are you going to help?
Yeah. And there's like so many things that we've talked about very briefly or mentioned very briefly in this that I'm like, well, at the very least, you could do something to raise the our pay, what we get. You could do something to prevent housing and rent going wild.
Right.
There's like so many small things.
How about
you could do?
We save the environment and help the environment so our children don't grow into this horrible hellscape with no access to anything. Because, beaches are being closed off because of bacteria that's growing because of climate change and pollution. What are we going to do about that, y'all? But yeah, on top of that, if every child is special and unique and has all these things, then we need to treat each child as a special case and provide exactly what is needed, including whatever medical care they need, and without grumbling and without fighting and without overcharging.
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome too. Mm-hmm. And just like one more reminder here, disability in this country is expensive and very, very expensive. Another story we read estimated that without Medicaid provided through SSI, the person in question would have to pay $100,000 to $200,000 a year for in-home visits. Yeah, that's the number I was looking for, honestly, because 50 to 70 with Medicaid is pretty generous. I think even with Medicaid, it would probably hit to the $100,000 a year, especially if it's like in-home care, consistent in-home care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it depends on so many factors too. But it's expensive. That we can say for sure. And going back to another point that you mentioned, Samantha, another part of this whole thing is this overblown and politicized fear of fraud, that people are essentially trying to game the system, and that people with disabilities are lazy and aren't trustworthy, not worthy, honestly. And not only is that completely wrong, it was clear in doing this research, as I said, how difficult every step of this is, from getting the benefits to proving that you need them to keeping them.
Right. Just as a reminder, to lose disability, it doesn't take anything. Literally, yeah. You have to be so on top of everything that you may not even get a notice that you're about to be dropped.
Yes, there have been a lot of news stories about that lately. Here's a quote from Forbes. As disability scholar Ari Neiman recently noted in a New York Times article on how benefits are confusing by design, the sheer complexity of these different rules are, like most disability benefits rules, Kafkaesque. Intentionally or not, they further penalize people who have less access to accurate information and less ability to strategically plan out their finances and legal arrangements. Because obviously, if you know about these penalties ahead of time, you can avoid them by simply not getting married. It's a terrible position and a gut-wrenching decision, as anyone who is married or has wanted to marry well knows. But the penalty itself and the supposed savings to the taxpayer is easily avoided. But it's also easily triggered if the people involved don't know about it or if they get bad advice about it. In a sense, the government hopes in part to save money by disabled people accidentally triggering these benefits reductions.
Right. Again, we go back to they also hope they can just kill them off. It's eugenics. Legitimately. Yeah. Anyway, continue on. Another Times article from 2016 quotes Philip Cohen, a sociologist at the University of Maryland College Park, who notes the overall first marriage rate in the United States for people aged 18 to 49 is 48.9 per 1,000. For people with disability, it's just 24.4.
And yes, as you said, some have even brought up the dark history of eugenics in this and how this, intentionally or not, seems to discourage disabled people from getting married, which is something many people do before they have kids, not everybody. It even seems to incentivize divorce, which when you put it in context of the whole Christian conservative push for the nuclear family, seems a little off. Something is not right.
Well, I mean, if we follow along those lines and we know that it comes from an Aryan background, it makes a lot more sense.
It's true.
We laugh because we're in pain, but
yes,
that's just real.
Yeah. Yep. And of course, there are a lot of discussions and disagreements around marriage, but for many, it does signify acceptance by society, a legal recognition of commitment, something someone may have wanted their whole life. And for a lot of folks, there are substantial government benefits for getting married. And it seems pretty up that in this case, it's the opposite. If it's a choice between living and functioning in marriage, then there's no real choices there. And I feel like the fact that they have that kind of holding out for marriage really drives home the point of it doesn't even matter if they think that you're basically a married couple, then that they're going to take those benefits away anyway.
Right. Literally trying to find any reason to take the benefits away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as I said, for some people, this is life or death. This is
right.
So
for a chunk of people, this is life or death, like end point. Mm-hmm. Because as we've talked about before, and as has been stated by many disability activists, being able-bodied is temporary, whether it's age or whatnot. Being disabled is a reality. Is going to happen. We see that again, like, you and I have talked about the fact that our parents recently had gone to the hospital for different incidents, and we fear when they fall or when they do something and are no longer able to care for themselves. The cost of money just in trying to find in-living care for elderly is absurd. And if they are not already provided by Medicare, which is great, but they're still trying to cut Medicare. We saw that in the state of Georgia, they're trying to cut Medicare and trying to reason with my parents about your governor has done this, but they don't quite see it. They have come to the realization that Medicare is allowed for them to go get examinations, which I'm really glad that they have actually taken the opportunity to use those benefits, but trying to remind them this is very, very, we're on a very thin line on whether or not this is going to be accessible in the future.
Yes. And just to note, again, I'm not legal experts, but a lot of this does relate to in the US when you get Social Security as an older person as well. So a lot of it does have.
Right. They're all interlocking.
Yeah. It's just, please don't look up, do your own research. I hope this is a good starting off point. But like we said, it's confusing. It's purposely designed to be confusing.
And it changes often.
So I believe the numbers we quoted in this was as of 2023 or 2024. Mm-hmm. So it was a recent change. Right. But thank you so much, Jude, for suggesting this. And if there's anything we got wrong or could have phrased better, because I was a little wow, this is some dense documentation.
This is intense.
Yes, please let us know. And if there are any resources or if you have any stories you would like us to share, I would love to hear from all of you. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast. We're also on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're on YouTube and we are on TeePublic. And we have a book you can get wherever you get your books, where we did talk about some of this stuff in there. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.